I'm going to read an excerpt, or a shortened version of quite a long poem that's in my book. It's called The Pencil Method, which is how the Swiss writer Robert Walser described his way of overcoming writer's block. It was partly a real physical cramp in his hand, brought on by writing in a highly elaborate formal style with a pen, but it was also about overcoming a psychological cramp, which was eased by Walser using a tiny, almost illegible script with a pencil. One writer felt that this relieved Walser from what he described as the burden of always being in the spotlight of his own critical judgment. He could pretend to himself as he was writing, almost wasn't writing at all, because it couldn't be read. So for various neurotic reasons, I also go to quite extreme lengths to persuade myself when writing a poem that I'm doing something else. And with the pencil method, my way of doing this was to create something midway between a kind of verbal doodling and a collage of words and phrases taken from texts by different writers and artists about doodling. Someone described doodling as an alibi. It's just a doodle that frees its creator from having to worry about art. And it's also, of course, about doing something with your hands whilst your mind is elsewhere, wandering out the door, as it were. Poetry audiences are always free to drift off somewhere else in their minds when listening to a poet. But in this case, I think I'm positively encouraging it. Try and pretend you're not even at a poetry reading. And no, I'm not. The poem begins with the initial sentence from G.K. Chesterton's essay on lying in bed. Lying in bed would be an altogether perfect and supreme experience if only one had a coloured pencil long enough to draw on the ceiling. Lying on the ceiling would also be altogether, if only one only had a pencil long enough to draw on experience. A pencil long enough to draw altogether in bed on the ceiling. On Lying in Bed by G.K. Chesterton. By lying in bed on G.K. Chesterton. Lying on bed on buying in lead in Chesterfield. Gawp, gawp at, gawp in at, gawp at in, gawp in at, gawp at in, gawp at in, gawp at in, gawp at in, gawp in at in at, gawp in at in at, gawp at in at in at, gawp at in at in at, in at in at in at, in gawp at in, at gawp in at gawp, gawp in at gawp in, gawp in gawp at, gawp in at gawp at, gawp in at gawp at in, gawp in at gawp at in, gawp in at gawp at in, Clement Attlee, MP, while his mind is otherwise engaged playing the tuba. About my playing the tuba, seems like a lot of fuss has been made about that. Everybody does something silly when they're thinking. Labrador and poodle are derived from Doolittle. Tuba players running around loose. I can't begin to tell you how sick of it he was running around loose tuba. This revived my writerly enthusiasm such that I now have mastered the art of being patient with the aid of my pencil. The unique bliss of the pencil method, the noblesse oblige of tensile steel, the bleak abbess of the penal Connolly. You need less of this, less of the nibbles urethra. Or Una on the buses, with Una and the pencil stubs, the purposeful, uninterrupted yet dreamy hand movements of Una Stubbs, the New Quay bypass. New Quay, Newbury. Thank you, Matt, for Matt Stubbs bypass. The U and each bleak cleek, as the blue neats blissed out kissed in Bleebury. Then each creek's blessing of the unskilled Methodist, parsnips in the distillery. You need the poplar, you need to piss off the poplar, not the yew tree. You need less than all of this. You need less of the pencil method and more of the birth pangs. By means of the pencil, By means of the pencil, I slowly freed myself. By means of slowly, I freed myself laboriously from the Observer Book of Dogs. Writing remains, the non-human remains, pressed up against seldom blasé. It calms me down and cheers me up. For some, it's a tree trunk, it's a straining to assert a tree trunk, it's a tree trunk, it's a tree trunk, it's a long trudge to Spain, glued together to ecstasy. What is a tree trunk? It's a brass rubbing from a double-decker bus, a dozen or more 10 years glued together to children, adding this reservoir, she blew sheets upon this reservoir. She blew sheets upon fresh marks over old associations. These bears, the title the books turn into. Fresh marks over old, these bears, the title. Rambles, bemused, begrasped. If only the books turn into brickwork, along rambles, bemused. But such dripping pens on a rail journey in the doldrums, but such indeed apprentice clerk, rambles bemused, proves the pen and potato method. Hallelujah, Mesopotamia. The need he seems to need to carry telescopes. Once wriggling free, I learned again like a little boy, bilingualism. Entangled plant life, which is nowadays the source of the scratching, and another need to uncles, aunts, cousins, or the ends of logs. The state of kelp helps to staple the hen. Dark and fearsome in their glaring anatomies, paced and loose first rode through the revelation of an album of children, adding loves, making stamping letters. My body is content, Berbera, August, content, wooden outhouse, an ascetic cell. What influences, rules on white paper, a box, many of these. But in toto, does that mean anything? I mean, what do people do all day? What do people do all day? All day, what do people do all day? What do people do all day? What do people do all day? What do people do? People do all day. What people do what? I mean what? Thank you.